Hello listeners, and welcome to this bonus episode of The Cult Vault. I'm your speaker Casey, and today I have an interview with journalist Andrew Gold, who I had the honour of meeting at CrimeCon in London. This episode is available as a full video interview at the Cult Vault YouTube channel, and please consider checking out Andrew's podcast, On the Edge. Quick disclaimer, this episode is not solely about cults and high-demand groups, but that discussion does take place around 1 hour or so into the episode. I took the time to learn more about Andrew and his journalism career and various interesting experiences. So now, here is Andrew. So hello, Andrew, and welcome to the show. Thank you for agreeing to come and chat with me today after our compelling conversations at CrimeCon in London. Would you like to start by introducing yourself to the listeners?
Yes, hello. Thanks for having me on, Casey. It was lovely meeting you the other day. So I'm a journalist. I'm 33 years old. I'm a multilinguist or a polyglot. I love languages, so I speak 5 languages. I learned in my 20s, which I spent living and working abroad, Argentina, Germany, Brazil, what else? France. I present and make documentaries. I made one, which I think we'll talk about later, about exorcism, which was a lot of fun and crazy and horrible at the same time, and that was for the BBC. And I've made other things about UFO belief and things like that for the HBO or whatever. And I have a podcast called On the Edge with Andrew Gold. The irony I'm starting to realize is that although it's quite edgy, most of the guests I have on are quite sort of moderate and centrist, and they're talking about the perils of the edges, which could be cults. There's a lot of cult people, could be ideologies. It's mostly about sort of when critical thinking goes into magical thinking and bad things happen as a result of it. So that's why there's a lot of sort of ex-religious people on, and also like Richard Dawkins and Amanda Knox. And I suppose that's who I am in a nutshell. Yeah.
Oh, so there's a lot there. I mean, 5 languages. I know from your documentary that Spanish must be one of them.
Yeah, that's right.
And the other 4?
I cheat a bit because I include English, and I'm careful about saying I learned to speak 5 languages instead of I learned 5, because I already could speak one quite fluently, English. The Portuguese, German, French, and Spanish are the 4, and then English, of course.
Wow, that's really interesting. I was going to ask, in the documentary that we're going to talk about in a little while, I was really surprised that you were actually, you didn't have a translator. There was a translator, but you were actually speaking to the people in Argentina in their language. And I was thinking, I didn't know that you could speak all these languages. So that makes so much more sense. But was there still a barrier in terms of the Spanish that they would speak in Argentina and traditional Spanish as a language?
Well, that's the Spanish I learned because I was living in Argentina. Well, I first learned Colombian Spanish because I lived there for a year. I went out to Medellin, which was like Pablo Escobar's old city, and I lived there for a year, and I learned Colombian Spanish, which is a lot more. I don't know what an equivalent in English would be, but it's quite sort of sing-song. Maybe it's like Welsh. I don't know. It's a bit more like do. Whereas Argentine Spanish has this like Italian sound to it, and it's quite European, and I found it quite cool. So after a year in Colombia, I moved down to Argentina and started to pick up their Spanish. And there are big differences. I mean, even some of the pronouns and things are completely different. The way that they would say, like, literally the word you is different in Argentine to how it is in Colombian Spanish. And so how you conjugate the verb that goes with you is completely different as well.
Oh, my goodness.
And then things like... I don't know if you know the Y or the double L in Spanish is pronounced like a Y, like Marbella, the Y at the end.
Estrella, yeah, I know that one, yeah.
Estrella as in star. In Colombia, that Y changes to a J, so it's Medellin, Marbella, Estrella. And then that J in Argentine Spanish turns to a Sh, so it's Estrella, Marbella.
Oh, gosh.
Pollo, as in chicken, pollo is pollo. So that took a long time for my head to just, the way you learn languages and the way languages sort of set up in your head, you're not thinking all the time, you're not translating in your head, you're just hearing it. But it takes a long time for your head to sort of understand all the things that were y are now sh, and it's coming at you so fast. So that took months, but I didn't meet that exorcist until I'd been there a good 6 to 12 months. So The Exorcist, yeah, I met The Exorcist after 6, 12 months out there. And so I was already pretty well versed in Argentine Spanish by then. And it definitely, I grew up watching Louis Theroux. Part of why I wanted to learn languages was because I wanted to be, and then for Americans who they won't know him maybe, or he's Louis Theroux or something. He's a presenter on screen who goes around talking to weird and strange people. But I thought if I'm going to stand out from him, I want to be able to do something he can't do, which was speak foreign languages and do all that stuff. But one of the things Louis does really well is he has this faux naive facade that he puts on a little bit. And I think he's able to do that because he's got this really slow, very English middle class way of talking. So when he's out in America, where he mostly does his documentaries, they sort of see him as a foreigner, like an other. And so he can get away with being a bit cheeky in a way that like the audience knows that he's doing, but they don't know. So I was able to use that by being all like, the way I was speaking Spanish, I would have sounded foreign to them. And so this Exorcist guy would not have, he just thought I was there to look at his amazing stuff he was doing and not to maybe expose the wrongdoings he was doing. He underestimated me, I think, which was helpful.
That's really interesting to hear your insight into that, especially around how you described Louis Theroux, which I think is perfect. I've always called it the clever idiot, where you're like, oh my goodness, I had no idea that was what was happening here with your exorcisms. But of course, you knew the whole time. You've got the dark hair and you've got the height. I mean, so maybe there was something that you needed to, because I know people can't see Andrew sitting down, but you are quite tall. You're 6 foot something.
6'3" or 6'4", somewhere between that. And on the documentary of The Exorcist, I seem taller because they're all very short.
Oh my goodness, yes, you look like a giant, yes.
But you'd already met me, so you knew I wasn't like outrageously tall.
But I still do remember thinking when I met you, Andrew's really tall.
Oh.
So as a journalist, talk us through how you ended up in this role. Was it something that you knew you always wanted to do? You've talked about kind of always having an interest in languages, but did you naturally gravitate towards journalism and this particular type of journalism, or was it something you just fell into?
I think journalism's a really funny thing, and I think it's misunderstood even by people who are becoming journalists. I think that the older I get, the more I think that everybody has a big ego. Because I was going to say just now that I think people who want to be journalists tend to have a bit of an ego. I think everyone has an ego and it comes out in different ways. And I think a lot of getting into journalism is about the ego, and it's about becoming this sort of person. I don't know. We watched maybe movies about people in the 70s that beat journalists whenever they were, and like with these cool people. What journalism really is in its essence is quite, in my opinion, it's a little bit boring. It's like news. And you've got to be really passionate about news. So many journalists are people like me who thought like, I'm going to be this big writer person, or even someone that I'm going to be like Carrie from Sex and the City. I'm going to be like, writing these columns about my opinions and people are going to listen to me. And what you find when you're doing a journalism course, which I did after university, you very quickly find like, oh, actually, it's the opposite. I have to completely efface my personality. The whole point of it is that none of my personality comes through. And although it has my name next to it, it might as well have not been written by me. A good journalist, you shouldn't even know who wrote it. You wouldn't be able to tell, because it's just like putting the news together. So I quickly found that I was really bored doing that. And maybe it didn't satisfy some sort of egotistical urge inside me. And I'd grown up on Theroux, as I say. So I just thought, I was working at The Sun, actually. I managed to get a job doing night shifts at The Sun. And it's not a newspaper I read myself, and it's not one I particularly like, but it was a job, and I worked nights there. And I was responsible for putting the Page 3 girl, which is a model that had her breasts out. I had to put her onto the iPad, and she was 3D, and you could twist her around on the iPad, which is, it was a bit soul destroying, really. Not that I'm like above any of it, but it's just like, that's not what I want to be doing with my life. I was doing articles as well. And one night my cousin had been living out in Venezuela, and he'd been cycling around, and he said, I was telling him how awful this job was. I didn't enjoy it. And he said, why don't you come out to South America? So right then and there, I got a free flight that from The Sun, because I was going to write about the Medellin Flower Festival in Colombia. And they sent me out there for free, and I just never got the return flight. So I stayed out there and started picking up copywriting work online and working for various different publications. Sometimes I was a bit like, an activist for the coffee farmers out in Colombia. They're not getting enough pay and that kind of stuff. And then gradually, when I moved to Argentina, I thought, okay, I've learned Spanish now. I already had French. I'd lived in France for a few years. And I thought, I want to start making the Louis Theroux documentaries, but with languages. That's what I want to. So I started making these little videos, and I got in touch with TV channels around the world who all didn't reply to me, but then one did. And they took some documentaries I made with them about UFO believers and infidelity in Argentina, little things like that. And they ended up selling those. This company sold them to HBO. I don't even know if it ever went out. I don't know anything about what happened to those videos afterwards, except that they paid us for what for me was a lot of money at the time to go out and spend a week in the middle of nowhere in Argentina in this beautiful landscape searching for UFOs. So that's how it all sort of started.
I feel like when I asked the question if it was something you decided to do or fell into it, it's kind of a bit of both. You knew that you were interested in working in journalism, but maybe didn't know what kind of journalism or what that meant for you. And then someone offers you this opportunity to go to South America and you're like, oh, I'll just follow this and see where it goes. I love that. I love that spontaneity. I can't imagine just being like, okay, I'll follow you to South America.
I know, but look, I was 23.
Wow.
So it was all a bit different. I'd never planned to live abroad. I was rubbish at languages at school. I was really bad. And I was studying English literature at university. And we got an email one day from the French department saying that some students studying French had pulled out of their year abroad, their Erasmus or whatever. Does anyone from the English department want to go? And it just so happened that I was checking my email at that moment, and it was a first come, first serve thing. Because if it was done based on results and stuff, I wouldn't have had a chance. I was pretty middle of the road, but it was first come, first serve. And I just replied, I'd never, ever thought about languages, living abroad, anything like that. But I just emailed back going, well, look, I can always pull out of this later. Let's just see if I get it. So, and it was Montpellier, so it was the south coast as well, the south coast of France. So I thought, compared to Leeds, where I was, which I'd loved, but cold and groggy. And now I was going to be going to the Côte d'Azur and the south of France, to study. And then once out there, I never thought I'd actually learn French. I didn't think it was possible to learn another language, and it happened. So that changed my whole thinking. And then, a couple of years later, I was so bored in this night job at the Sun in London, and cold and miserable and dark in the winter. And I was like, you know what, I'm going somewhere. And Medellin as well, it's known as the city of eternal spring. So I was just like, yeah, so every day it's 25 degrees and blue skies. You do get bored of that after a year, but it was nice at first.
So there's been a few times in your life where there's been kind of opportunities that spring up out of the blue that you've kind of held onto with both hands. I think that's exciting and kind of encapsulates the kind of mentality I imagine you need to pursue the types of stories that you have gone on to cover, because somebody like a little homebody like me now, I feel like I was adventurous a few years ago, but now I feel like if I was to go and kind of, spend time with the Padre like you did in your exorcism documentary, I'd be so far out of my comfort zone. And what would you say personally was your first successful piece of journalism? You really thought, wow, this is thorough. I've covered all my bases here. I don't feel like I could just keep digging and digging and digging and following this person or event for years. Do you kind of have an idea of what that was for you?
Yeah. Well, I just want to add to your last point as well, that I think we're all very adventurous in different ways, and we can look at people. I think if I was trying to be one of those fake Instagram people, I'd be like, look at me, I'm such an adventurer. And the reality was so I had 7 years in Argentina. A lot of that was me playing FIFA in my flat out there. I had a nice setup, and it was quite relatively cheap. I was mostly working in copywriting online. So I made the Exorcism film, and I made a few other films which got a bit of money for a bit of time. But the vast chunk of time there was copywriting, boring work. And in terms of adventure, I'm remarkably unadventurous. I find it very hard to just go for a walk. My girlfriend's away for a couple of weeks at the moment. I hardly leave the house. I'm a real insular person. So there are different kinds, and there are people who just go and climb mountains and stuff and do all this. I could never do that. Whereas for me, it was yeah, okay, this exorcist is calling. Ah, why not? I want to have a mad experience. I'm going to die in 50 years or 40 or something. So let's do this. Why not? So that's that. And I only say that because I don't want other people to get the false impression like, oh, everyone's more adventurous than me. It's like we're all adventurous in such different ways. But yeah, I suppose. So the most. I was doing some stuff early on. So I worked at the Watford Observer. So it's like a local newspaper. And I got to write about, what was it? Exposing police spending on stupid things. And that was the most like journalism thing I've ever done. It was pretty much the first thing I ever did and the last thing that was like, this is journalism at a local level where I'm exposing a wrongdoing. And I had my name on it and I was very excited. And it was a double page in the Watford Observer. It was all great. And then I got very disillusioned with it because the very first day at the Watford Observer, and I was working there, it was for free. It was an internship while I was studying to be a journalist. The very first day they had me in there and they sort of forgot about me. And I was sitting there, standard thing for an intern. And you're like, you feel really useless. And I was like, what should I do? I don't know what to do. And they said, I went and said to someone, can I get a computer or something? Is there any work for me here? And they said like, oh, you know what? Some 18-year-old died in a car crash. And we need to send somebody to find out if the kid had links to Watford or not, because it was Hemel Hempstead just outside Watford. And they wanted to know if there was a Watford angle to cover the story. So I was like so excited to have something to do. I didn't really think about what was happening. So I was like, yeah. And they were like, you have a car, right? And I was like, yeah. And I was just like, I'm going to be helpful. So I got in my car and drove like 25 minutes to this place. It's a crash site on the side of a road. This 18-year-old kid had died the night before. And there's like flowers on the side of the road, flowers and cards. And I was just like, at that point, it dawned on me like, oh, this is a real thing. Like a kid died last night. There's like bits of the car here and there were flowers and cards and things. So I was in my car and it was raining and I was parked on the side of the road. And I was just thinking, I can't go and find out what am I going to, talk to the people who are like grieving and putting cards down and stuff? No way. So I called my stepmom, who is a journalist, and she's more of like an old-fashioned traditional journalist. So she was just like, so I said like, I don't think I can do this. And she was like, get out the car now and go and start looking at those cards and things. That's what you've got to do. And I was like, I can't. And she said, go, you've got to do it. It's your job. So I got out and I went over and I had like a pen and paper and I was just like, excuse me. And a woman just turned and said, fuck off. And I went, okay. And I went back in the car. And then I called my stepmom again and said, oh, a woman said to fuck off. And she said, right, wait till she goes and you're going again. And I was like, I can't. And I went again and there was like a woman there with 2 kids who must have gone to school with this kid who died. And I was just like asking and I said, hi, I'm a journalist, but do you mind if I ask you a few questions? And she said to her kids, do you want to talk to this journalist? And they said no. So then I was just there and then they left. And then I looked in the cards and I had to see like any reference to Watford. Anyway, I felt awful. And this is my first day ever in journalism. And I drove back to the place just like depressed and miserable and thinking, I can't do this. This isn't the kind of thing I want to do in my life. And I went and found the guy who had sent me off there. And I said, okay, yeah, I couldn't really find any links to Watford. I'm not sure, although somebody mentioned Watford somewhere. And then he said, who was this again? Because he'd just forgotten. He didn't even care.
Oh, wow.
So that was like my first day, and it was the realization, right, I don't want to do this. I want to make weird, interesting documentaries where I can ask people to come and join me if they want, and if they don't want to be on camera, I don't want to like bother people who's just lost a friend. I don't want to be that person. So that was like, yeah, the first, that and this sort of police spending thing I did with the Watford Observer, they were the only sort of proper journalism things I've done. And then after that, it all became like aliens and weird stuff and exorcism and pedophiles as we'd call them as well. I won an award last year for my journalism looking into pedophiles in Germany. I met loads of them, and that was a weird year of my life.
I was going to say congratulations then, but it's strange to kind of be like, oh my goodness, that's fantastic. Congratulations in the context of speaking about pedophiles. So that obviously in terms of your work, that's incredible. But I imagine it must have been strange for you to work so closely with a certain type of person.
Yeah, I mean the first it was something I decided to do because we had just moved to Berlin. It was like, okay, let's learn German now and let's go to this new country. And then the first thing is like, okay, so what does Germany have? I've been to the UFOs and the exorcism and stuff like that in Argentina. What can I get here? And it's like, okay, Nazis and there's communists and stuff. The language itself deserves a documentary about it because it's so mad. But we were learning it reading Harry Potter in German, which was fun. But yeah, so I what I found was that Germany had the world's only, apparently, clinic, state-sponsored clinic for paedophiles that never reports them to authorities.
Oh my
So
goodness.
yeah, so the idea is like it will get more of them in to actually get help and not offend, but it means that therapists could be letting people they suspect are abusing children back onto the street.
That reminds me of a conversation that we had at CrimeCon as well, around the person that you spoke to about the equipment that he had made to help people take their own lives.
Assisted suicide guy.
Wow. So you're really having these conversations where there's a huge, and of course this is kind of, you say that this explicitly in the exorcism documentary, but you're really having these conversations with people where there's a kind of a moral and ethical, is this right thing to consider? And I don't think it's possible to answer any of those questions. So you must leave like feeling, it's like when you watch an episode of Unsolved and then you're like,
oh yeah,
annoyed at the end because it's still unsolved. So yeah. What was your personal take on this clinic that you did? Did you go to visit?
Yeah, I went to visit them and I met loads of their patients, which was weird and hard and stuff. And you're right, assisted suicide's another one because you grow up, don't you? Just, I suppose, as a teenager especially, and you start to decide who you are politically. Often when you're young, it tends to be towards sort of whatever left wing is or whatever's cool in the culture, you know. So for me, it was all that stuff, and it was just automatically a lot of stuff I still hold dear to me, like being pro-choice, for example, is quite important to me, that kind of thing. But a lot of other things that were like these liberal things, I'm now like, oh. And one example is like, it was very obvious to me years ago, and I think wrongly now, but it was very obvious to me that if somebody wants to kill themselves, that should be legal. That was just so obvious. And then doing an interview with this guy, Philip Nitschke, his name is, and he makes suicide machines for people so they can opt out of their lives, which sounds very liberal. And I think it is a good thing because if, you know, but what I didn't even think about when people started commenting at me, and this is the beauty of having a podcast, as I'm sure you get different perspectives of people emailing in and stuff. And someone just said, right, but what about people who feel like they're a burden to their family and get pressured into killing themselves? And that's something I'd never even considered. And then it was like, oh, my sort of liberal anyone can kill themselves thing now is being tested by some very good logic. And you're right, you leave just going, okay, I don't know what the answer is. And I think that's okay. I think we can embrace uncertainty. And I think that's something that humans find really hard. But sometimes that's the best place to be. I don't know what the right thing is to do regarding the law on assisted suicide. With pedophiles, I've started to come around to the German way of thinking, actually, because, so I met them, I met the clinicians, and I met some of the patients. And some of the patients were really nice people who are non-offenders. In fact, they're pretty much all non-offenders, as in they have the attraction and the desires or the illness, whatever we want to call it. I don't know what it is, but they feel attracted to children. They can't form attractions to adults, so they can never have consenting relationships. And they understand that they can never download what they call child sexual abuse material. They understand they can never touch a child and they shouldn't really be around them. So these are these like good people who have these attractions and they struggle with it. There are also the bad ones, and there's not much we can do about them because they're psychopaths. But then you get people who are somewhere in between, who have all these like good desires. They want to be the good people, but they struggle with it. And helping them come into therapy, you know, without feeling they're going to be judged and stigmatized is quite important, because we know that generally in crime, that if you stigmatize someone, if you know, outside of the clinic, somebody had graffitied hang the pedophiles. If you do that kind of thing, that person's not going to go back to therapy next week. And what they might do, which is very dangerous, instead of that, they'll go online and they'll reach out to other people like them who might not be awful people. They might be similar to them, and they wanted to go to therapy a lot and they couldn't, and they've been pushed back. And then they might start telling each other, you know what, it's not so bad to do these things to children. Here's an example of a child who was fine. I was abused myself and I was fine. You know, those kinds of things they might tell each other. They're suddenly in like this dark corner of the internet because none of us are reaching out to them. And then they will commit crimes. So it's very tempting and understandable, the urge to just want to shout out and kill them all and whatever, but you can't kill them all because more of them are being made. So this often gets misunderstood by people, sometimes willfully, I think, as a call to give more sympathy to paedophiles. That's not what this is, and that's another question entirely, and it's not something I'm that interested in. This is a call to reduce child abuse, and at the moment, I think something like 1 in 9 girls in the US are molested as children. So if you want to cut that down, it's not enough to just look at the kids and say to the kids, okay, be safer, because it's often a family member that does it. It's often someone they know. There's not much, it's blaming the kid. We need to start looking at the perpetrators. Well, the perpetrators aren't going to give themselves up to us. Obviously, we catch some of them, and those are the ones who have already acted, and they go to prison. So that's a different matter. But the ones who have never offended but might still, we need to reach out and talk to them. And this clinic, what they do is they put out things like fake child sexual abuse material so that these guys click it to download it. And when it opens, it's not a file, that kind of stuff. What's actually in there is just a thing saying, you need help. We're here to help. Call this number. You're completely anonymous. No one will judge you. But come and talk to us. And then the clinic tries to disabuse them of their cognitive biases. They explain how awful it is to touch children and why it's so wrong and all these things. So I've come around to that way of thinking rather than just leaving them to fester in online groups where they might sort of egg each other on.
Yeah. And those online spaces at the moment are becoming increasingly more radical as we speak about on the show, not specifically in regards to paedophilia and individuals that are attracted to children. But what you said about, it's not a call to give more sympathy to people that are attracted to children. I think that's really important to distinguish because, and it's really uncomfortable for me to have this conversation, obviously, with 2 children in the house. And people's techniques, and we see this with cults and coercion all of the time, people's techniques in terms of grooming, in terms of thought reform, they change and adapt and become more intelligent all of the time. So even if you feel like you've covered all your bases in making sure that your children talk to you about things, that they tell you if they've been put in an unsafe situation or in an abusive situation, the people that are working in these environments are often so many steps ahead of us that they're already working out ways to work around what you've told your children.
People don't want to hear this, but as I say, I think I don't know the exact statistic, but it's quite well established that it is generally a close friend of the family. It is generally an uncle or something like that. So as you say, it's utterly useless saying to the kid, watch, wait, don't go through that park, or make sure this or that. Like, it's then they'll go out with Uncle Johnny, and everybody wants to go, what? Not my brother, not my uncle, not my, and it is usually men, the vast majority of them, not my grandfather or whatever. But statistically, some people listening to this, some of us, they will be in our families. And I would rather that those people go to therapy than my kids be told, be careful in the park. We need to get those people into therapy. And at the moment in the UK, if they go to tell a doctor that, the therapist has to report them to authorities. And it's a bit cloudy as to what happens after that, but they have like a marker against their name. And if the therapist doesn't report them, the therapist or the doctor will get struck off. In Australia and the US, it's more severe. If they don't report one of these people, they go to prison. They can go to prison for not reporting.
Wow.
So Germany's gone with, and look, there are all sorts of pitfalls on the other side. And that's what we talked about before, like with assisted suicide. Like, nothing's that simple. There are always downfalls to it. And Germany's had this very liberal attitude towards pedophilia. A lot of countries have done, and they've got horrible pasts. But Germany in particular, in Berlin, in the 80s or 70s, I think it was, there was a psychiatrist called Kentler, Dr. Kentler, who Berlin basically had two big problems at the time, and one was they had loads of homeless children, which was probably some sort of remnant of the Soviet stuff that was going on. They also had a lot of pedophiles they didn't know what to do with, and so this guy came up with a solution that he put homeless boys in foster homes with known pedophiles. Because he thought that was a solution, like killing two birds with one stone. And what went on there was horrifying, horrific. And that has had a black stain on the Green Party over in Germany up till this day. It's still, because they were linked with this movement, which was very left-wing and happened in France as well in particular. But around the world, there was this big left-wing movement in the 70s and 80s towards allowing like consensual adult-child sexual relationships, which is a black stain on that side of things.
So a pretty heavy subject matter, really. I recall you saying something at CrimeCon about watching the assisted suicide machine actually in operation. And I couldn't wrap my head around the fact that that was actually something that had taken place. And the machine would actually ask the person, are you sure you want to do this?
So this was Philip Nitschke, who has been pushing for the allowance of suicide laws in Australia and the world for ages. And I think he's got a company called Exit UK or something like that. And they give information about how you can do it and safe ways, unpainful ways that aren't going to go wrong, affordable ways that are not messy. It's hard to think about. But yeah, he created a machine which I think has just been made legal in Switzerland. And I know that because in Germany, that I was on the news, but nobody told me. But I think I told you, a friend of mine was watching in Berlin. She just happened to look up and saw me on the news because I'd interviewed him months before, and they didn't tell me or like ask for my permission to use the interview. And I still, haven't seen it myself. I just heard that I was on. But it got made legal somewhere. He basically has like a pod now that you stand inside. It's shaped like it looks like a futuristic coffin that's standing up, like a spaceship coffin, and you stand inside, and it's like, I think it gases you, or it might inject you, I'm not sure. And then the coffin is ready to be put into the ground, and it's biodegradable or something like that, and so it sort of, it's good for the earth, some stuff like that. But what he was talking about, that story was before this machine. This was probably 10, 20 years ago. He did it differently. He had a different machine. The trick was, you're not allowed to assist people in suicide. Like, I think you're allowed to commit suicide in many countries, but you're not allowed to assist someone else. So his trick was, he would make these machines so that the person only had to push a button. So he had a machine, and he talked about this story where the first time he did it, where he was in the room with the man's wife, and he's just sitting there next to her, and across the room on this sort of bed or contraption, I don't know, is the guy who's killing himself because I think he had some sort of illness, I'm not sure. And basically it pops up a screen, something pops up on the screen saying, you're about to kill yourself. Do you want to do this? And he has to push yes, the guy who's going to kill himself. And meanwhile, the Philip Nitschke is on the other side of the room because he's saying, look, I'm not involved. I didn't do any of this. And then it just pops up, are you sure you want to exit life? And you push yes, and then it injects you with something. And over the next few minutes, you die. And there is something, you're right, there's something so visceral or so weird about that thing. Like, are you sure you want to exit life? And you're like, okay. And then you close your eyes, and then that's the end of your game, I suppose. It's like life. Yeah.
Odd. It gives me like the heaves. But it's again one of those, as you said, questions like, is it right or wrong? And I think it's probably both, and there's no way to so you're putting yourself in these situations where the answers to the questions are absolutely impossible. And with some of the other people that you've spoken to throughout your career, I think you've got those questions. We were talking at CrimeCon about you interviewing Amanda Knox, and everyone was like, do you think that she committed murder? And you're like, maybe she did, maybe she didn't. So again, another one of those questions.
Yeah, I feel it's unlikely that she did. I feel very unlikely now after that Netflix documentary. But we all thought she did because of the way it was reported in the UK. Now it's like, okay, there was this guy with a history of burglary whose DNA was found all around the room with the smashed windows and all this stuff. And it was initially they'd said that Knox and her boyfriend of the time had like framed it, and they couldn't have smashed the window that particular way. They faked the burglary. But it's like, what, they also faked this guy's DNA, who was a burglar in the area, who'd burgled loads of people. Like, come on. And then it changed to, no, well, they were having a sex game with him. And it's like, come on, I'm not having that. But as you say, there's like, you don't know. So I'm talking to her and I'm looking into those same like bright blue eyes that she has. They're just like so penetrating, her eyes. There's nothing quite like them. And I think that's part of what made her so alluring. Obviously she's very attractive, but it's not just attraction. It's like those eyes stare like blue, icy cold, and they stare through the camera at you. And you're looking, and I had, I watched the Netflix. I was obsessed with the case at the time because I was also studying abroad. And I was also, my home university was Leeds, which was Meredith Kercher, the victims university.
So a lot of parallels.
Oh, yeah. And it was right at the same time, I think. So that was a huge thing. And I watched and watched, and I just looked into her eyes as if you can tell anything from someone's eyes. You can't. You really can't. But I thought you could. And seeing those eyes then after years as, a teenager and in my 20s, watching her, and she's just on the other side of the screen to me, as you are to me now, was just like, oh, my heart was racing. And I was like all hot, and I didn't know what to do or what to think. As it happened, she was so charming. And I know people are going to say now, yeah, well, psychopaths are charming. And it's like, well, yes, they are, but so are people who are not psychopaths. And most people are not psychopaths. And they're often charming as well. She was really charming, really fun, really great to talk to about Harry Potter and languages as well. So we bonded over that because she also speaks German and Italian and a few things. She was in prison in Italy for 4 years, just with a bunch of Italian criminals and stuff. Like, it's insane. So I think with that one, I would rather a one-time murderer who's probably never going to murder again be set loose than somebody who potentially didn't do it be put in prison for 20, 30 years. It's scary. It's a scary thought. But I mean, I have spoken to people who have killed people on the podcast as well. There was a guy, but he said, this was a guy I had on who, and it was done audio because all mine are video, but we had to do it in audio because he was calling from prison. And he had tried to commit suicide and missed his head sitting on the stairs and shot up the stairs by accident, just as his wife was up there. And she'd been shot in the back. And she then rolled down the stairs and like sort of fell on top of him. And he was all surprised. He didn't know what was going on. He'd meant to shoot himself. And again, like, you meet these people, you get all friendly with them. And I start to feel like he definitely believes himself now, but was that really what went on? Why was she shot in the back? It seems like she must have been running away, but he was so nice with me and he was like so sad about what he'd done.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. It's just very difficult. And you're sitting there like and what I say on the podcast a lot is like, because sometimes people might get in touch and they'll be like, you should do this. And how did you platform that person? And that kind of thing. And I say, look, if you want like that, you go to the like BBC, and I've worked for the BBC. You've got like 1 million lawyers to talk to about anything you do. What I'm doing is putting curiosity over judgment. I'm trying not to judge people. I'm letting the viewers and the listeners decide and letting them be curious. I'm not going to like put out fake news, but I'm going to say, I'm interviewing this guy. I don't know the truth. Like if I knew, then I'd tell you, but we're going to talk and let's see what happens.
Cool. Do you know what? With the episodes I usually do, there's a beginning, middle, and end, and they're kind of like a nice little tidied up in a nice little bow. But you're kind of, I don't know how you can go around with no closure on any of the things that you discuss. I
love it.
Do you feel like with some of the other things you've covered that it's less kind of open-ended? Because you mentioned UFOs, and I don't know how you personally align with, or maybe you've spoken to people that have made you think yes or no. What would you say are your kind of wildest interactions around that subject matter?
UFOs as well is interesting. I mean, I think you're hitting at something that I hadn't actually considered this before, but I think I have almost a fetish, but not a sexual one, but like a fetish for uncertainty. And when I was a teenager, I had really bad obsessive compulsive disorder, and I had to see a therapist because I was just like spending not all night, like flicking switches, opening and closing doors and things. Like it would be like 5 a.m, and I was preparing for my GCSEs, my 16-year-old exams or whatever, and I just didn't sleep a wink because I would just be like testing doors and lights all night like a nutcase. It was really bad at one stage, and depressing, and just I was miserable. And this therapist helped me in a weird way where he sort of, and I'm not sure it's necessarily the right way or the wrong way, but he recommended I start obsessing about not obsessing. So he was saying, rather than like checking over and over that your door is shut, which I used to do. I even went outside, I would check my car door when I was 17. I had a little third or fourth hand car, and I ripped the door handle off. Like the car handle came off in my hand because I was testing that it was locked so many times over and over for a year. I'd go out like 5 times in the night and just go,
oh my goodness.
Yeah, it was mad. But so he was like, so then it was like, okay, so I'm going to go to sleep now, but make sure the door is a tiny bit open, which would annoy most people, I think. But for me, it was like, it sort of worked because rather than going and checking it's closed, it's like, well, I can see it's a bit open and I'm going to obsess about that. And I started to obsess about uncertainty.
Wow.
So and that's fun in journalism, just finding that middle ground. And of course I need to be mature about it and not just like have my fun with like, the Nazis and be like, well, they had a point. You can't do that. They didn't have a point. But with most like of the culture wars, I try to see both sides. Some of those things are really foreign to me as a British person, like probably for you as well, like guns, for example. Most British people were very against guns. We didn't grow up with them. I still would like there to be a lot more restriction on guns, but I am trying to see that other side. And they do have a very different culture. And you do hear people say we need to be able to defend ourselves. And that sounds ridiculous. But then you hear them say, yes, well, wouldn't the Ukrainians all like to be armed with guns, right? And it's not me now changing. I'm still on that side of I don't like guns. It's just going, okay, I can try and get my brain to a place where I can understand both sides. So UFOs, there's almost certainly aliens out there because the universe is that big. The universe is billions of years old. So there are almost certainly not only some aliens out there, but aliens who are more advanced than us, potentially millions of years older than us. On the other side of that coin, the universe is just so vast. It's so huge. Life itself is so rare. Especially complicated, complex life like us. It might be that these people who are more complicated than us are so far away that it's just ridiculous. And then recently there's been this sort of new UFO stuff, because the UFO stuff I was looking at was complete bollocks, because that was just a tourist trap, basically. It's a town in a beautiful place in Argentina that I was lucky to get to go to with beautiful, lovely people who all believe in aliens who are like little green men who something
traditional aliens, I want to say, in kind of air quotes, traditional aliens.
They're like cartoon aliens. So something happened where there was like a bit of the forest seemed to burn, and there's a huge patch on the mountainside that looks like burnt forest, but they all said there was no fire, there's no reason for it, blah blah blah, it must have been aliens. And since then there's been like this big tourist thing around it. It's a new age town. So every town is like, every shop is like full of all the hippie new age stuff, and there's a lot of tat that they're selling. But a lot of these people believe in it. And the documentary I made, I was going out to find these beings that apparently live underground and are from the 5th dimension. And yeah, to me, it's utter bullshit. So that is somewhere where I'm not in the middle of that. But there have been a lot of like the Navy in the US have been releasing images finally recently of what they now call it. It's like you say, it was like the old traditional ones are UFOs, and now they're called UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena. And it really is military personnel saying we can't explain what that is. It looks like technology much better than our own. It could be from like Russia or China spying on us or something, or it could be extraterrestrial. And it seems like there is a chance that is something. And the suggestion is, maybe these beings have sent, robots that have traveled millions of years to get to where we are, and they're sort of filming us. We're like a reality show back on their planet. But then there are also, and I spoke to someone from the Ministry of Defense whose job was to look out for this stuff.
Whoa, like someone actually has the job title of looking out for UAPs.
Yeah, he had that. Nick Pope is his name, which is also the name of a goalkeeper in football. But this Nick Pope worked for the MOD, and he talked about all that stuff. However, there are also, so I'm going to be all middle ground again. There are people who do these big YouTube channel videos debunking even the military ones that are out at the moment, and they're saying, look how that moves. That's clearly a reflection in the light. It's this and that. I personally, I'll be in the middle. Like, who knows what's there, but probably not little green.
And some of the other people that you've had the opportunity to speak to on your show, which is anybody that's listening that's probably thinking, how does this link to cults? I'm listening to an episode and I'm kind of waiting. We are going to get to that part. And you have spoken to survivors and individuals who have left groups like the Westboro Baptist Church, NXIVM, Scientology, and so there is that content on your show On the Edge that people can go and check out. And you also mentioned early on when you said kind of where rational thinking maybe goes into radical thinking, goes into magical thinking, and then we've spoken a little bit there about UFOs, and we've talked a little bit about radical online spaces and the potential for offline harm. You spoke to a woman who you said was extremely pro-life. And I wondered if you feel like that conversation with her kind of moved into that conspiracy space and the kind of rhetoric that we're seeing come out of some of the more radical groups in America at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough, isn't it? Like I guess with with the aliens, I am like you. I am desperate to know. So I am desperate to know facts. Like the fact would be there was an alien here. Where I like being in the middle ground is ideology, right? There's no fact around. This is very controversial territory at the moment, but like the trans movement, the gender, that's what's getting I'm in Bristol right now, and yesterday they were all at each other's throats. So we had radical feminists and trans people on the other side, and they were just like going mad at each other. And that's a really hard one. And it's the type of thing where, again, I want to be in the middle and see both sides ideologically, because I can't see where the facts are. It's so hard. With UFOs, I want to know. What are the facts? Please tell me. Are they here? I'd love that. It would be fantastic. And so that's why I get a lot of cults on the podcast as well, because it's the ideological stuff interests me. People moving one side or the other, and I'm trying to stay in the middle. And when you go to a cult, unless you were born into it, when you join a cult, you've been moved, I suppose, ideologically, in the same way that someone might have been moved one way or the other in the trans versus radical feminist debate, or the critical race theory versus the anti-woke debate, all these things going on in our society. My favorite ever quote is this guy, philosopher Bertrand Russell. And he says, when you're studying any matter or considering any philosophy, ask yourself only what are the facts and what is the truth that the facts bear out. Never let yourself be diverted either by what you wish to believe or by what you think would have beneficial social effects if it were believed. But look only and solely at what are the facts. So that's what I try to do in every episode or every topic. It's not like, oh, wouldn't it be great if this were true, which we sometimes believe. It's look at the facts, and that's hard. So with abortion, that is really, really difficult. And I have academics on the show as well. And I had a guy called Carl Zimmer who wrote a book called something like On the Edge of Life. He was defining what life is. And it wasn't about abortion in this book. It was about science and life and stuff. And what I didn't realize is that we don't have a consensus on what makes life, or what life is. So at school, I was given, and you probably had this as well, they had those, what do you call them, pneumatics? Can't remember what they're called. When it's called like Mrs. Gren, and it was like movement, respiration, sex, growth, reproduction, excretion, nutrition. And that was like, that's what life is. I don't think I was very satisfied back then learning that when I was 14 with it's like, well, what is that? That could be anything. And he makes the point, Carl Zimmer, of like, is a brain on its own alive? Is a cell in a body alive? Are you an alive person made up of millions of alive cells and lots of alive organs? It's really, really hard. And we change the definition of life depending on what state and what country we're in. He tells the story of this. There was a girl who unfortunately had a routine surgery when she was 11, and she became brain dead, and they were going to pull the plug. And her parents got involved in a law case because they said, we're going to move her to Florida. I think she was in California. And in Florida, the law isn't your brain, it's about your body. And her body was still alive, and the brain was very, very much almost not alive. So in California, she was dead, and they moved her to Florida. She was alive. So we have this really strange relationship with what's alive and what's not. And the interesting thing about that girl is she stayed in a coma for about 10 years, and unfortunately she died at the end of it. But during that coma for 10 years, she went through puberty, which implies that her brain was alive.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Some part of her brain was alive. She was still being fed. She was still, a lot of those, movement or all those things, she was still doing those things. So by all accounts, she was alive, but the state of California was willing to say she was dead. So that's where we are with how difficult it is to know what's life and what is death, and what is pro-life and what is not. The pro-life people are the sort of, they say you can't, like killing a 1-day-old fetus is killing life. Well, technically you could make that argument that is true, that bundle of cells is alive, but you could make the same argument about your hair. If you cut your hair, you're cutting life. So it's really hard to know when you are killing life, and how important that is and how much that matters. So that's where I try to stay on the abortion thing. What was interesting with her was, she's the crazy baby lady. People know her as that. And she's a complete nutcase. And she goes around to women who are trying to terminate their pregnancies, and she has these plastic fetuses that she like chucks at them, and she like taunts them and shouts at them. So she's bonkers. But again, what was really interesting was I was going on like the school run with her, picking up her kids with her, having meals with her at her home, meeting her family. And she was just so nice to me. She was so lovely. We had such a nice time. And I just remember thinking, like, she could be my auntie or my grandma or my mum.
Oh,
and
gosh.
We've all got mums and aunties and grandmas or grandpas and dads and stuff with mad views who do morally questionable things. But you make an exception to an extent. Obviously, families sometimes, break up and argue. But you remember that they're human. And I think that's what's lost a lot of the time when we have these debates. She's forgetting that the women who want to terminate their pregnancies are human. They're forgetting that she's human. And that's why I try to be in the middle of that, although I'm not, because I am pro-choice. But yeah, that taught me a lot, that experience with her. And it made me really think like, the people who disagree with me ideologically are just as human, just as entitled to their point of view as I am. And I can't be right about everything, right? So I must be wrong sometimes. And I don't know which cases they are.
I feel like that's the more opportunities that we have to interact with people that we might not necessarily typically align ourselves with, the more we're able to change our perspectives and thoughts on things. And that's such a wonderful thing. I remember thinking, cults are just, I mentioned this at my session at CrimeCon, cults are just what I've seen in documentaries about Jonestown. Oh my goodness, I was absolutely so wrong about that. And even just before we hit record, talking about the Keep Sweet, Pray and Obey documentary about the FLDS movement, how much was missed now from that documentary. But me, before this podcast, I would have just been like, wow, that was an interesting documentary. Now I know everything about the FLDS church. And now me at 200 or so episodes into this podcast, I'm thinking, where's all the coverage on this? And where's all the coverage on this? And it's amazing how much my thoughts have changed around true crime as a subject, and actually how unethical it is in some ways, how true crime is marketed. So it's interesting how our experiences and exposure to different people can really change how we, or maybe not change, but maybe allow us to understand it more, so that we can be better informed to have opinions about things.
It's something I say about Joe Rogan as well, because people say he's a meathead and he's an idiot and all this stuff. And like he may well have been, had he not done his podcast. He's obviously curious though, and that's something I really like. I like curious people, even if he comes down on perhaps a slightly more right-wing conclusions than what I come to. I appreciate that he's really curious, and sometimes he doesn't go with the way you expect him to. But there's a very, on the one hand, you get some sort of right-wing people who are like, let's do away with experts, and they don't trust experts anymore. But then you get people on the other side who put, I think, too much emphasis on like a college degree. I've had people say to me before about the cult stuff. They say like, oh yeah, well, do you have a degree in cults? And I say like, well, I've got a degree in English literature, and we learned a lot about like ideologies and stuff. I don't have a cults degree. And they're like, right, well, you shouldn't be talking about it. And there's this, it can be too much of like if you don't have a written piece of paper from a university, and it's like, who do you think is going to be more knowledgeable or whose views will be more interesting? Some 18-year-olds and who went to university for a few years, 15 years ago, and now is in their 30s and did a degree in something, and had to answer exams and learned a lot of stuff, but probably forgot most of it the day after the exams, because that's what I did. I forgot all of it straight after every exam so that I could make space to learn for the next exams. Or Joe Rogan, who has now done, I don't know how many thousands of podcast episodes with some of the biggest experts in the world, and basically received a free education from them, 3 hours. And with, I don't know about him, but any journalist or podcaster, you've got to read their books. You've got to study up on them. You put the questions down so you don't forget it, because you're writing it down, everything you've been thinking about. Then afterwards, you might edit it so you listen again and you hear it goes back in your head again. So he spent 3 years speaking to some of the like biggest brains in the world. No college education could get anywhere near that. And no, he hasn't had to certify it and pass exams in the same way as students. So you could argue that both of them have gaps in their knowledge, and it would actually be interesting to sort of combine both of them. But to completely negate what Joe Rogan must have learned in thousands of episodes with these people, I think is an oversight, just as it is an oversight from people on the other side to suggest that it's worthless being an expert and having a college degree. So again, I'm being somewhere in the middle of those two things.
Yeah. And I think that's an interesting point as well. I remember when I graduated from the Liverpool Institute for Performing Arts, and you have the big ceremony, and it's kind of Paul McCartney's performing arts school. So he's there for every graduation, and that's a big highlight for a lot of students that tried to get a place on one of the courses. And you go and you shake his hand, and he's kind of says congratulations, and that's really cool. And then at our graduation, they have honorary students who have never studied, but they've contributed so much to the field of performing arts that they just give them a degree. And I remember Mark Ronson was the honorary student who was given a degree at our graduation, but I was kind of annoyed by that, because I was like, But the way you just see, we're just having those conversations.
Imagine you getting an honorary degree somewhere at a university for, I don't know, anthropology or some sort of cult criminology kind of thing. I think you would feel like, hey, I've put the legwork in.
Exactly. But I never would have thought about it from that position if you wouldn't have just said what you said about Joe Rogan. So at the time, I remember thinking, this degree was really tough. And here comes Mark Ronson with all of his money and all of his success, and he's just going to be handed a degree. But now from, what you've said, there's a reason why he has that money and that success. And actually, he did a masterclass at the university where he came and spoke about how he would be playing DJ sets from 5 to 7 in the morning to like 3 or 4 people who were just so beyond the point of drunk at that point that they wouldn't even know who he was or what set he played.
Joe Rogan is an adult who is, researched and broadcast his, and I wouldn't want people to think that I'm saying that, he's immune from criticism, because I think he does get things wrong. He does make assumptions, and he's prone to the same magical thinking and lapses in judgment that the rest of us are. And you can say that's dangerous when he has a big platform, but the BBC make mistakes as well. Channel 4 make big mistakes, and it's life. We make mistakes. We're human.
And actually, it kind of leads us nicely into our next section about talking about people that have significant platforms and have lots of people following them and hanging off of their every word, which is kind of how I saw the Padre in your documentary Exorcism. So I'm kind of just going to give you the floor here to set the scene for us and tell us what you can without giving away too. I mean, the ending was wild. So we won't talk about the ending because people can go and find your documentary on YouTube. I'll include a link in the episode description along with your website and all of the places people can find your work, which we will touch on before we finish. But I'm not going to mention the end. So I'll let you kind of
lead us up to the point where you want to stop so people can check out the show for themselves.
Yes. Okay. Well, also my website, no, I don't even update it anymore. But I need links to the YouTube and the audio version of the podcast. That'd just be great. It takes a while because I realize that people are going to have to click on the website and then to the podcast. Whereas if you just give the link to the podcast, they're going, because you can't ask people to do 2 clicks. Yes, Padre Manuel. And I don't mind revealing the end because I think it actually, if anything, it entices people to watch it more. I don't think they're going to, when they hear
see it for themselves, maybe.
Yeah, I think so. I showed my neighbors, they didn't know about it, like I'd done all this BBC stuff, and I showed them the other night, and like they're like, drunk, and it was whatever time in the morning, but then that last 10 minutes sort of perked them up, and they went and they were suddenly right in it. He's a priest, evangelical. He's actually Lutheran, but everyone thinks he's Catholic. I mean, it doesn't make a difference. He's just saying whatever he's saying. He's just a guy who has a church. And I saw him on TV. I was living out in Argentina, and we don't have in Britain, we don't really have those religious TV channels that they have in the States and they have in South America. So they're sort of funny to us, I suppose. And so he was there, like talking about, the kinds of food you should eat before Halloween so that werewolves don't get you, or whatever nonsense. And the thing that annoyed me about him was, firstly, he's got this really pompous look on his face. He's got a very stern set of like beady eyes and like this sort of chubby cheeks that make him look really feral, which shouldn't matter because it's people's looks, but it's the way he conducts himself more than his actual physical looks. And it annoyed me that he was also not just on these religious channels, he was on quite mainstream TV channels and just mainstream presenters. Just imagine the equivalents in the UK or the US or wherever you're listening, just your normal, morning TV programs. He would just have his own segment and come on and tell everyone all this mad stuff. And we were supposed to just take it as read. So I got in touch with the BBC, told them about this guy. They were really interested at first. And then, like all TV projects, it never led to anything. I think they were a little bit put off by the fact it wasn't going to all be in English. We do some bits in English and I do the voiceover in English, but talking with him, he doesn't, this is the kind of place where they don't speak English out in the suburbs, quite an impoverished area. So yeah, I got in touch with him. I told him I'm hoping to sell it to the BBC, but I don't know. But can I come and film you? And my friend David came out to Argentina and lived there for like 6 to 12 months because he was really interested by this idea and he wanted to live somewhere else. And so both of us were basically doing other work, copywriting and things like that to get by. And then like in the evenings, we would go down to the church and hang out with the padre or the priest, basically the exorcist, and his team. Watched some of their exorcisms. I got to take part in one. That was the idea. The first one that we watched, it was a woman called Natalia who had urges and pushes and things that might be, they could be coming from schizophrenia. They could be coming from OCD, depression. I'm not sure what. She would need a psychiatrist to look after her and assess her. But we did her exorcism, and that sort of changed things for me, because I think a little bit like what you were saying about cults when you first started doing the podcast, that it was like this sort of, okay, weird, sort of culty, whatever. And then you get into it and you're like, oh, bloody hell, this is quite deep and intense. And I thought this was going to be funny because whenever I'd seen exorcism footage, it looked funny. It was made fun of because you don't know the people being exorcised. You don't often speak their language. So they're sort of othered by that. So it's like, some Mexican mum. It just seems like an other thing to a lot of Westerners, and it's funny and silly, and they're screaming and they're making a fool of themselves, and we like it and we find it funny. And that's why I wanted to take part, because like the Louis Theroux documentaries, I thought, okay, I'm going to get involved myself and it'll be funny and silly. So I'm like ringing the bells above her head because the bells are supposed to ward off the devil, and it's utter nonsense, of course. But I looked down at her and I was just like, it was one of the scariest moments of my life, because I didn't think she was having any kind of paranormal event, but she was clearly having some sort of psychological breakdown right in front of me. And I'm not a doctor. What the hell am I doing? Just standing, hovering above this woman's head with a pair of bells while she's screaming and screaming. So after that, my director, David, and we decided, okay, from now on, I'm not going to be involved in these because it's quite serious. This could, who knows what might happen next? She might go and kill herself or something because it was such an extreme thing. It's not appropriate for me to sort of be, doing the Louis Theroux glance and the smile while doing the silly thing I was doing. So after that, I didn't do it anymore. We got close to a girl who was 17 called Candela, who was cutting her wrists and was suicidal and had bulimia and anorexia, and her family didn't know what to do. They'd been to doctors, so they sent her to the exorcist. And again, her exorcism was really, really tough to watch because we'd become very close with her over the few weeks, like David and I and her family. And just seeing her screaming and knowing like this is not a good idea, this is not going to help. The funny thing was it did help with both of them and with another woman who called Paula, who was the Padre's assistant after being exorcised. They did all seem to get much better and be cured of their psychological distress. And again, for wanting to always be in the middle ground, this was really difficult with exorcism because, like I say, there are some things that I won't entertain. And like I won't entertain like defending the Nazis. That's when it's too far. And I won't entertain the idea that exorcism is anything but nonsense. It's just I can't get my head into that space. Some people can. Others could say, okay, well, you're a biased journalist, and if that's the case, I have to just accept that because I can't get my head to that space. But what was interesting was to see, okay, but here's the interesting thing. It's not what I thought. Exorcism does help these people, and that's probably through some sort of suggestion and hypnosis. The placebo effect is like extraordinary. It's just amazing how it works. And I had to go back a year later to see that these women were worse than they had been to start off with. So it was a temporary band-aid that sort of snapped them out of some sort of the mental anguish they were in until it didn't work anymore. The last part of the film that you're referring to, basically I'd been asking too many questions about his relationship with one of the women he exorcised, called Paula, who was his assistant now. They appeared to live together upstairs. They were always together, just the two of them. She was like 22 or something by this point. She had been exorcised a few years before. He's like in his mid-50s. So it's not appropriate. I guess it wouldn't necessarily be illegal, I'm not sure, but not appropriate for a priest to, if there is some sort of thing going on there. And the last 10 minutes, he sort of figured out what I was getting at, and he wouldn't let the team, well, my friend David and another friend of ours who came with that night, come into the room. So we're there filming from outside. My microphone is on, and he just screams and screams and screams at me for like 10 minutes, just saying mad stuff. And we thought we were going to die because we were out in the middle of nowhere. We hadn't yet sold it to the BBC. We just made this ourselves. No one knew where we were. We had no like security with us. It was like a proper, like an hour outside of Buenos Aires, really impoverished area, like midnight. And we thought, yeah, we're not going to get out of here because this is the kind of thing where people do just get killed, and it would be in the newspaper and all that stuff, but that would be that. Eventually we did get out. He had a big mass to do, and we had to sort of shuffle outside, and we got out after being pushed around a bit, and got home, and we were just like shaking the whole time, David and I, because we were so scared of what had happened. And it was only like the next few days we started to go back through the material we had, and we realized how outrageous it was. Because we knew that to sell something to the BBC, it couldn't just be a normal documentary about exorcism. We didn't expect we ever would be able to do that, like a big 40-minute or hour-long documentary. We never thought we'd be able to sell that. But this happened, and it made it quite unique, and that was very lucky for us. Like, it's so unusual to see a priest get shown up in that way, exposed in that way, screaming like a lunatic about the Falkland Islands and things like that.
Yeah, so that was wild. Yeah, that yeah. Really was. He kind of threw a lot of racist stuff out there about British people towards the end, I guess.
Oh yeah. Well, the Falkland stuff, we didn't hear it at the time. So that was another thing where, because it's a 40-minute documentary, which you can see on like YouTube. I don't really mind if people see it or not, because it doesn't get me any like whatever. But I want people to go to my podcast. But yeah, you can see it on YouTube and that, and it's like 40 minutes, and we actually had like 20 to 30 hours of footage and audio and stuff. So that's a pain. Just the two of us with we couldn't pay people to do it, and we had our own jobs and stuff. So that took months of David and I, while in Argentina, after our normal jobs, we'd like get together and sit in a room and each have like headphones on, listening to different bits and pieces, like which amounted to hours of stuff, just listening and listening. And it was in Spanish, and a lot of it was said like when they were far away from microphones, and it's just barely audible. So we're trying to hear this Spanish that's half audible. And yeah, halfway through, I guess, after like days and days, I heard this like, did he say the Falkland Islands there? Was that what he said? And I had to show my girlfriend, and we had to like get it like made louder and stuff. We're like, yeah, he really, when he left the room there, he said like, don't trust them. They're British. They took the Falklands. It was like, what an odd thing for a priest to be saying as he's about to do a mass and he's angry about my accusations about a girl. And yeah, it was great that it happened, I guess.
It was very, very well done. I know it's a BBC documentary now, but of course, you know, where you go through the methods and how you actually created that documentary before the BBC kind of took it and you know, so it's really impressive to think that you were able to capture things the way that you did. When you said that you feared for your lives towards the end, I think it's important to just let the listeners know that the Padre Manuel was about to go and do this mass, and there were hundreds and hundreds of people inside the small building where he conducted these exorcisms, and also outside the building, lining the streets. If there would have been a fire, people would have been in danger. There were so many people. So there's you being screamed at by this man who holds all of this power, where all of the people in that building are there to watch him, because they kind of hang off of his every word, and they take everything that he says as the truth, as gospel. They see him as, you know, almost like a prophet. And there's you being shouted at by this man that has all of this influence. And then you have to make your way from the back room of this building out through this mass of people. So when you said that you really did fear for your life, it was, for me, I was like, oh gosh, how are they going to get out of this building? There's so many people. They've got all of their equipment, and you had all your bags and everything with you. And it was, that was a really, really tense part of the documentary. But
when thousands of them, and they were in as you saw, they were in a fervor. They were like frothing at the mouth. They were like all falling over each other. They had the music from The Exorcist, the film, playing, Tubular Bells, and getting louder and louder on a loop. And while he's backstage screaming at me, they're all getting ready for this midnight mass, which is like the biggest one of the year or whatever. I think there were maybe thousands and it might have even been up to 10,000 people, because they're all in the room. They're like filtering out through the back, and they're on the street, and the streets are closed off by like little police cars and things. There's just thousands of them. So had he said, you know, get those guys, that would have been it for us. Like they would have 100%, they would have just torn us apart and killed us. We got out. And we were then like, what we had been doing is we'd usually been seeing him in the day. So we got the church to call us a taxi usually. And it was like an hour back into the town. Or we were getting a train to get there. But we couldn't get them to get us a taxi because we'd fallen out with them. And we're in the middle of nowhere now. So that was another scary thing, being out in this area. It's a really, really dodgy area with like expensive equipment and stuff. And it's just me and my mate David and Demian, who was we called him translator because production assistant would have been too long to write in the subtitles. But he was like an 18-year-old like guy that we knew who helped us out. So we got out, and then we were just walking, and then David said, "Oh, you know what? It didn't film right when you were walking out of the church." So, and I was like, "Oh," and he was like, "We're going to have to go back in and walk back out again." And I was like, "Mate, we don't need me walking out the church." And he's like really professional. He's a fantastic director. And he was like, we really do, mate. Like, we've got to go back in there. So we talked about that for a bit, and David and I ended up walking back over all of these bodies. By this point, like, he started his mass and he's talking about us being the devil and stuff. And we're climbing over bodies on the side of his like nave of the church, hoping to get through without him seeing us, get back to like where we'd been arguing. And then he turned the camera on, and then I had to walk back over all these bodies again while he's screaming and all this stuff. And luckily, like, no one like really noticed us. They were in such a fervor at that point. But yeah, scariest night of my life.
It's pretty wild. I mean, I do recommend it for anybody that's kind of looking for something to watch, something maybe a bit different in terms of cult documentary coverage. And the only reason I say cult is because, again, going back to the amount of influence and power that you could see that this one individual held, almost like a cult of personality, I would say. But then also there is the argument that him and Paula, one-on-one cults do exist. And she had gone to have this experience with the Padre. She'd had her exorcism, and then she left her whole family. She was living without being paid with the Padre, doing all of this work for him. And, there's a few times where people say in the documentary, you have to be careful with what I say because I'm closer to the Padre, and people that are closer to the Padre, they get his anger more because, he trusts them more. And that's not a good thing. That's not a good thing in any way. So the circumstances in which Paula was living with the Padre and her isolation from the outside world, and how, she completely believed in all of the things that he was saying and doing with all of these people that had questionable mental health conditions, again, would lead me to think that perhaps there is the potential there to consider a one-on-one cult, even if you wouldn't consider that the Padre himself has a cult, which I think is probably very easy to argue that he does.
Yeah, I think he does, but I know what you mean as well. It's like he's got the cult, and then he's got a specific inner cult just with her. But that makes all the other people close to him quite jealous. So we had those little moments where people are whispering, and they're not. I don't know if they know they're being filmed or whatever, and they're saying well, they're always together. They're annoyed and huffing and puffing. And there's a bit, because I've watched it so many times now. Obviously, when we're editing it, I must have watched it about 30,000 times. So you see little things all the time. And there's this bit that. There's two of the priests that work for the Padre, and one of them's talking, and then the other sort of interrupts and says, well, I'm closer to the Padre, so I often get, I think you were just, alluding to it, I get a lot of stuff because I'm closer to him. And as he says, I'm closer to him, the other guy, who's this older guy, so he makes this really submissive gesture. He bows his head and puts his hand up as if to suggest yes, of course you are closer. There's this hierarchy and I respect it so much. And it's just so sad that they're all caught up in that, but maybe I suppose it gives them purpose.
It's hard to know after people have these experiences, but there's so much we could talk about in terms of this, as you said, hypnotism, suggestion. There's the music, there's the musical instruments, there's the conformity and the fervor that's created through, a group environment and setting where everybody's kind of falling in the spirit, and other kind of religious terminology that people might use. But I'm sure that the hierarchy exists purposefully, and I'm sure that the Padre is aware of this internal battle that people have for his favor and uses that to only further his agenda of keeping people close to him or at arm's length. That's just what I would say is happening from my experience of speaking with individuals. So it might not be the case, but I probably I'm quite confident in saying that it might be. So that's kind of your life into journalism, some of the wild experiences that you've had. What are your plans now with your podcast On the Edge? Do you have any guests coming up that are particularly exciting for you to talk to us about?
Yeah, well, I think there's an interesting person coming on just this week called, it's either David McRaney or McRaney, and he has a book about the science to changing people's minds. So I'm really interested in that. I think he's quite sort of a liberal lefty kind of guy, and he talks a lot about, in his book, it's about going around to homophobic people and changing their minds so that the marriage gay marriage was allowed in America. So I found that really, really interesting. Otherwise, I'd recommend to people, especially if they're into cults, just go back through. I'm about to interview, Faith Yen from the Moonies. I just interviewed Tony Duchesne, who wrote Confessions of a Teenage Jesus Jerk, which is a movie about Jehovah's Witnesses. Mike King, who does cults and stuff as well, was just on as well. So there's just loads of cult ones. There's also celebrity people like David Baddiel and Richard Dawkins, Amanda Knox, John Ronson, who did the psychopath test and those kinds. And he's often involved in the true crime world. Molly Bloom, who was from Molly's Game, and she did the poker tables with Leonardo DiCaprio and the Olsen twins and all these people. And she, the mafia caught up with her before the FBI did, and they put a gun in her mouth, which is quite a horrible experience. So she talks about all that. So it's just a great big mix. And there are a lot that get into like the culture identity wars and things like that. I try to stay relatively in the middle, so I get shouted at by everyone. But it's all just worth talking about, isn't it? It's just...
Have an opinion. Tell us where you position yourself. We want to know.
With science and facts. That's all it is. But yeah, that's On the Edge with Andrew Gold. Also, if people come, do let me know that you came from... did you say you don't say your name on here? No.
Casey, yeah. I mean, I tell everyone my first name, but...
It's the first... You were saying your last name.
Yeah. Although Andrew did actually pry it out of me at CrimeCon, so if you really do want to know my last name, you'll have to track him down. So that's Andrew Gold's podcast, On the Edge, or On the Edge with Andrew Gold.
That's it.
And I will make sure that I put a link to the various things that we've talked about in this episode, if anybody wants to go and find that. Brilliant. So thank you so much for your time, Andrew. And I'm looking forward to catching up again with you soon.
Yeah, let me know when this is out. I'll share it.
That's great. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day, Andrew. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
That is the end of this week's episode. If you'd like to get in touch, you can do so by finding me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com or follow me on Twitter and Instagram at cultvaultpod. I'm your speaker, Casey, host of the Cult Vault podcast.